had just set my suitcase down by the front door when my son-in-law looked up at me from the kitchen table and said, "We've been waiting for you. There's something we need to tell you." He didn't stand up, didn't come over, just sat there with his hands folded in front of him like he was about to fire an employee. My daughter was beside him. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I had been gone for 11 days. A cruise, my first real vacation in 6 years. A gift to myself after I retired from 31 years as a senior compliance officer at a regional bank in Charlotte. I had earned every single day of that trip. Every sunrise over the Gulf. Every glass of wine I drank alone on the balcony because my husband of 42 years, Frank, had passed 2 winters before. And I was finally learning how to be somewhere beautiful without feeling guilty about it. I came home to an empty driveway, which I thought was strange. My daughter Patrice's minivan was usually parked out front when she visited. I'd asked her to check on the house while I was gone. Water the 2 ferns by the back window, bring in the mail, make sure the AC was running right. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and my suitcase wheel caught on the mat and I almost tripped, and that was when I looked up and saw them both sitting there, Patrice and her husband Darnell, and on the kitchen counter, fanned out in a neat row, were papers. Legal-looking papers. "Waiting for me," I repeated. "What does that mean, Darnell?" He cleared his throat. "Your financial situation has gotten complicated, June. We've been talking with an estate attorney." I set my purse down very slowly. "My financial situation," I said, "is none of your business." Patrice finally looked up. "Mama, you're 63. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house. You have savings but no income anymore, and the property taxes on this place went up again. We're worried." "You went through my property tax records." She shifted in her seat. "You gave me access to the house. To water my ferns?" Nobody said anything. I looked at the papers on the counter. I didn't touch them yet. I'd spent 31 years reading fine print for a living, and I had learned that the first rule of any document is that you never let the other party see you react to it. "What exactly," I said very calmly, "are those papers?" Darnell leaned forward. He had always been the kind of man who liked the sound of his own voice explaining things. He sold insurance for a living, which I'd always thought was fitting. "We've consulted with an attorney about a voluntary conservatorship arrangement, given your age and the size of the estate." "I'm 63, I said. "And the fact that you're widowed and living alone." "I have a master's degree in finance," I said. "I managed risk compliance for a bank with $400 million in assets. I just got back from a cruise where I calculated the exact tip percentages for 11 days of meals in 3 currencies. And you are sitting in my kitchen trying to tell me I need a conservator." Patrice's eyes were wet. "Mama, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I haven't signed anything." "We know," Darnell said. "That's why we're here, to walk you through it." I picked up the papers then, 17 pages. I flipped to the signature line at the back. They had already signed, both of them. And there was a line with my name printed neatly underneath it, with a little sticky tapped arrow pointing to the blank. I set the papers back down. "I'm going to go wash the travel off me," I said, "and then I'd like you both to leave." "Mama, I am not signing anything tonight." I walked down the hall to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. That cold, very specific kind of anger that only comes when someone you raised tries to do something to you that they would never have dared while your husband was alive. I thought about Frank. He would have walked them out the door already. He had a way of ending conversations without raising his voice. Just a look, a stillness, and whoever was on the receiving end always seemed to understand that the discussion was over. I had loved that about him. I had also, I realized now, relied on it more than I knew. Because here I was, alone, and my daughter and her husband had driven to my house with 17 pages of legal documents and waited for me to come home from vacation to ambush me with them. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, they were gone, but the papers were still on my kitchen counter. I made coffee, stood there in my robe, and read every word. It was worse than I'd thought. The conservatorship wasn't just about my finances. It covered healthcare decisions, property management, the right to sell the house if deemed necessary for the ward's well-being, and the conservator named in the documents, the person who would hold all of that authority, was Darnell. Not Patrice. Darnell. My son-in-law, who had bounced between 3 different insurance companies in 8 years, who had borrowed money from Frank twice and repaid it once, who had always looked at this house the way some men look at things they feel they're owed. I sat with that for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my friend Vera. We had known each other since our girls were in the same kindergarten class 30 years ago. Vera had worked as a paralegal for most of her career before she retired, and she was the sharpest person I knew. "Don't sign anything," she said, before I'd even finished explaining. "I know that. And don't confront them again until you've talked to a real attorney, your own attorney, not theirs." "I know that too." "June." Her voice softened. "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm angry," I said, "but I'm not scared, and I think that's the right way around." She laughed a little. "Good. Keep it that way." I found an elder law attorney through the North Carolina State Bar's referral service. Her name was Patricia O.C., and she had an office in a small brick building in Dilworth. I drove myself there 2 days later and sat across from her with the 17 pages and a yellow legal pad full of my own notes. She read through the documents while I waited. She had the same quality I had always tried to bring to my own work. She didn't react while she was still gathering information. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. "This is a voluntary petition," she said, "meaning no court has ordered this. They need your signature to proceed. Without it, this document is worth nothing." "I know." "Has anyone filed anything with the court?" "Not that I found." "Then you're in a much stronger position than you may feel right now." She folded her hands. "What I'd recommend is a few things. First, we send a formal letter to their attorney. It establishes that you have representation and that any further contact about this matter goes through me. Second, we document your capacity. That's a cognitive assessment, financial records, the works. We build a clear, contemporaneous record that you are fully competent in managing your affairs. And third," she smiled for the first time, "third, we look very carefully at what access your daughter has had to this house, your mail, and any accounts while you were away." That was the part that kept me up at night, because there was the matter of my mail. I had asked Patrice to hold it for me. When I got home, there was a rubber-banded stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter, but it was thinner than 11 days of mail should have been. I had noticed it and filed it away without thinking much about it. Now I thought about it. 2 days after my appointment with Patricia Osei, I called my bank. I had 2 accounts there. My checking, which had my Social Security and small pension direct deposited, and a savings account with the money Frank and I had built over 40 years. Careful, quiet, boring money, the kind of money that doesn't call attention to itself. Everything in my accounts was intact. But the bank representative mentioned, when I asked her to walk me through recent activity, that someone had called requesting account statements be mailed to an alternate address. The request had been flagged as unusual because it differed from my registered contact information and it had not been processed, but it had been made. The call had come in 8 days ago, while I was on the ship somewhere between Tampa and Cozumel. I asked for the date and time. I asked for the recorded call log. I wrote everything down. Then I went home and called Vera again. "They tried to redirect my bank statements," I said. A long pause. "June." "While I was gone. They must have been planning this for a while." "What do you want to do?" I looked out the window at the backyard Frank had put in 20 years ago. The azaleas he'd planted along the fence were starting to bloom, pink and stubborn, the way they came back every spring no matter what the winter had done. "I want to protect myself," I said, "and then I want them to understand exactly what they tried to do." In the weeks that followed, I moved with the same steadiness I had learned over 3 decades of compliance work. You don't rush, you don't tip your hand, you gather, you document, you verify. I changed the locks on the house. I was within my rights. It was my house, deeded solely to me, paid off 12 years ago. I had a locksmith come on a Tuesday morning, and by noon, I had new keys and a new deadbolt and a new sense of something I could only describe as boundary. I updated my estate documents with Patricia Osei. I had a will. Frank and I had done that together years ago, but it was outdated, and some of the language around property was vaguer than I liked. We tightened everything. I named Vera as my healthcare proxy. I named my nephew Theodore, who lives in Atlanta and works in corporate law, as my financial power of attorney. He is 51 years old, methodical, and deeply unimpressed by Darnell. I had a full cognitive evaluation done at my GP's office. Scored in the top percentile for my age group on every measure. Patricia Osei filed that assessment with a notarized affidavit in a sealed record. And I kept quiet about all of it. Patrice called 3 times in the first week. I answered once, kept my voice even, said I was still reviewing the documents and needed time to think. She said she loved me and just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I told her I loved her too. I did not tell her what I was doing. Darnell called once. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped we could discuss things as a family and that there was no need to involve outside parties. I saved the message. Patricia Osei sent it to her files. The outside parties were already involved. About 5 weeks after I got home from the cruise, my nephew Theodore called to tell me he'd finished reviewing the paper trail I'd sent him. The conservatorship petition would never have held up in court, he said. You show zero indicators of incapacity, but the bank redirect attempt is a different matter. Depending on intent, that could be wire fraud. I don't want to put Patrice in jail, I said. I know, but you need to know it's on the table. He paused. The question is what outcome you're actually after. I had thought about that. I had thought about it for 5 weeks, honestly, lying awake in Frank's house, listening to the spring rain and trying to figure out what I was actually angry about. I wasn't angry that Patrice was worried about me. Widowhood is hard. Living alone is strange. My daughter had watched her father die, and I think it broke something in her understanding of the world. The idea that things can just end, that people can just be gone. Her fear was real. But she had handed that fear to Darnell, and Darnell had turned it into paperwork. I want her to understand what he did, I said finally. I want her to see it clearly, and I want it to stop. Theodore thought for a moment. Then we send a letter. Not to their attorney, to Patrice directly. It was 3 pages, written by Theodore and reviewed by Patricia Osei. It laid out, clearly and without drama, everything we had found. The conservatorship petition with Darnell named as sole conservator, not Patrice. The attempted bank statement redirect, documented with the call log from the bank. The timeline showing that both actions occurred while I was on vacation, unreachable by phone. It asked no questions. It made no demands. It simply presented the facts and noted that all documentation had been filed with my attorney's office and would be retained. The last paragraph said, "We trust that no further action of this nature will be necessary." Theodore mailed it certified mail to their home address. I did not call Patrice. I did not text. I waited. She called me on a Saturday morning, 11 days later. It was early, around 7, and I was sitting on the back porch with my coffee, watching a mockingbird argue with itself in the azaleas. She was crying before she said a word. "Mama," she said. "Mama, I didn't know about the bank." "I know," I said, and I believed her, actually. "Tell me what you did know." It came out slowly, the way true things do when someone has been holding them a long time. Darnell had told her I was struggling, that I'd been confused about some bills, that he'd found discrepancies in things I'd said about my finances. He had shown her documents. She didn't know where he'd gotten them, that suggested my savings were lower than they actually were. He had framed the conservatorship as something that would protect me. "He told you I was confused," I said. "Yes. I have a master's degree in finance." A long silence. "I know." He named himself Conservator Patrice, not you. "Him. That's not protection. That's control. She cried for a while. I let her. I didn't try to make it easier or harder. I just sat with my coffee and listened and let the full weight of what she'd almost helped him do settle somewhere it couldn't be argued away. Eventually, she asked me what she should do. That's between you and your conscience, I said, and probably a marriage counselor. What I need from you is for this to be over. She said it was over. I believe that too. What I couldn't fully predict was Darnell. 2 weeks later, he called Theodore directly. He said he'd consulted with his own attorney and that the bank redirect had been a misunderstanding, that he'd been trying to help me manage correspondence and hadn't realized it might appear improper. He wanted to know if there was a way to resolve this without things getting more complicated. Theodore asked him to define complicated. Darnell said he hoped we all understood there had been no intention to harm anyone, that he cared deeply about his mother-in-law, and then he simply thought a family solution would be preferable to anything formal. Theodore told him that we agreed a family solution was preferable, and that the family solution was that Darnell would have no role, now or in the future, in the management of my finances or my affairs. He said that if any further attempts were made, any contact with my financial institutions, any legal filings, any correspondence that cited my name without my written consent, we would pursue the wire fraud angle in full. Darnell said he understood. He has not called again. I don't know what is happening in that marriage. I don't ask. Patrice comes to Sunday dinner once a month now, alone, and we eat at the kitchen table and talk about her kids and her job and sometimes about Frank. And she has never brought up the conservatorship, and neither have I. There is something a little fragile in how we are with each other now. Like a bone that healed, but you can still feel where it was broken if you press in the right place. I think that's honest. I'm not interested in pretending the break didn't happen. But I'm also not interested in pressing the bruise every time I see her. She is my daughter. She was scared. She made a terrible choice in who she trusted with that fear. Those three things can all be true at the same time. What I learned, or maybe what I was reminded of because I had known it once and then quietly forgotten, is that being older does not make you smaller. That widowhood is not the same thing as helplessness. That 31 years of reading fine print is exactly the kind of thing that saves you when someone puts 17 pages in front of you and expects you to be too tired or too sad or too trusting to read them. I was none of those things. I am 63 years old. I live alone in a house with paid-off azaleas and 2 thriving ferns and a backyard that still smells like Frank's Saturday morning lawn work when the humidity is right. I have a good attorney, a better friend, a nephew who answers his phone, and a savings account that no one has access to except me. Last month I booked another cruise, 14 days this time, Alaska. I left the itinerary on the kitchen counter before I went, right where those 17 pages used to be, and I thought about leaving a copy for Patrice in case she wanted to water the ferns again. I decided I'd ask Vera instead. I still think about the way those papers were laid out on my kitchen counter, so neat, so deliberate, like someone had rehearsed it. What strikes me now, looking back, is how much they were counting on the idea that I had become someone different. That grief had softened me into someone who would see 17 pages of legal documents and feel grateful someone was handling things. That 63 was close enough to helpless that I wouldn't read the fine print. I had spent 31 years reading fine print. There's something that happens when a person does the wrong thing for what they believe is a practical reason. They stop asking whether it's wrong and start asking whether it will work. Darnell didn't think of himself as a bad man. I'm certain of that. He thought of himself as someone solving a problem. The problem happened to be me and my house and the savings Frank and I had built quietly over 4 decades. He looked at my widowhood and saw an opening, and he walked through it with a briefcase and a notary stamp and the belief that I would be too tired, too sad, or too trusting to push back. That is the thing about doing wrong by someone who has spent their life paying attention. They notice. They don't always react immediately, but they notice. What I did in those weeks after I came home wasn't dramatic. I made phone calls. I took notes. I kept my voice level. I changed my locks on a Tuesday, And I went to bed that night feeling more like myself than I had in years. Not because I was fighting, but because I was thinking clearly, moving carefully, and refusing to be managed. Patrice made a choice I will never fully understand, and I've had to accept that I may not be meant to. She was afraid, and she handed her fear to someone who used it as a tool. That's its own kind of heartbreak, watching someone you love become an instrument of something they didn't fully see. Her intentions were not his intentions, but she signed those papers. That is also true. What I know is that the outcome of all of this, the failed petition, the dead-end redirect attempt, the silence from Darnell, wasn't luck. It was the direct result of three things I had spent a lifetime building without realizing I was building them. The integrity to refuse what felt wrong even when accepting it would have been easier. The clear-headedness to understand exactly what I was looking at and respond to the facts rather than the emotion. And the simple stubbornness to keep going when everything in me wanted to sit down and cry. Goodness without understanding can be taken advantage of. Understanding without the will to act on it is just knowing. And the will to act without a moral center can go anywhere, including to a kitchen table with papers that strip a woman of her own life. All three have to work together. I have seen what happens when they don't. I'm not the same person I was before I opened that front door. I think I'm a little less trusting in ways that are appropriate and maybe a little more trusting in ways that matter. I know now who picks up the phone, who reads the documents, who shows up. That knowledge is not small. Frank used to say that the only thing a person truly owns is the quality of their attention. I didn't always know what he meant. I think I do now. I booked Alaska, 14 days, window cabin. I'm bringing a good book and absolutely no one's paperwork.